Well, good afternoon, everyone. If you're joining us from the East Coast, and good morning from the West Coast. My name is Katie Vlietstra-Wanenberg. I'm a principal at Public-Private Strategies, and we are very excited for our conversation today, Rising to the Challenge, Business and Its Role in Democracy. We have a great program ahead. I appreciate all of you who are going to be able to stick with us for the full 2 hours. And I just wanted to let you know a couple of things from a housekeeping perspective. One, this call is being recorded. We also do anticipate that there is some media on the call as well. And we have an opportunity following each of our panel discussions for some Q&A. And today, given the size of the call, we are asking individuals to utilize the Q&A box on your screen to ask questions of our panelists, and our moderators will be able to weave in those questions. So I think we're all pretty familiar with Zoom. If you could go ahead and just use the Q&A function. And if you want to ask questions while the conversation is going on, we'll go ahead and make sure that we pull those into the conversation. So again, I just want to welcome everyone for what I know will be an excellent program on Rising to the Challenge, Business and Its Role in Democracy. I guess I'm going to jump right in since we are already here and have a great crew. So I just want to bring in our first speaker. We are very excited to have from the incoming Biden administration, Zach Butterworth, who will tomorrow start his new role. And Zach, I just want to give you the opportunity to speak a little bit about the Biden administration's first 100 days, the things that you're looking forward to and working on. And in general, just thank you. I know it's a very busy time, even with a virtual inauguration. There are many events that have been planned since the weekend and through tomorrow. So really appreciate you spending some time with us. Zach?
Yeah. Can you all see me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. Well, thank you all, Katie. Thank you, and Rhett, for bringing us together today. I'm excited to be here just a day before President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris take the oath of office tomorrow. I don't need to tell you the increasing importance that the role of business is playing in our society. As we watch what happened just 2 weeks ago, many of you spoke up to support a fair election. You called for a peaceful transition of power, and you all condemned the horrendous attack at the nation's capital. But as the president-elect says, we have to move forward to heal the soul of the nation, and that work will start tomorrow. But it is important, folks are busy, to be with you all, business leaders on many fronts, and many Americans are looking to you for guidance and as a trusted source of information now more than ever. As the president-elect says, we're in the midst of a dark winter. As the virus spreads, we have 20 million infections and 400,000, nearly 400,000 dead, an unimaginable number a year ago when we started learning about the virus. This health crisis, though, has caused an economic one that I know you all are all familiar with, and some of you are experiencing the devastating results of. We're leaving far too many Americans falling further and further behind, and through no fault of their own, as they lose jobs and their paychecks shrink. That's why President-elect Biden has laid out an aggressive two-step plan to first rescue the economy from the COVID crisis, and then put the economy on a road to recovery. So first, as you saw, President-elect Biden announced an immediate, bold plan that would speed up vaccinations, reopen schools, and get direct financial relief to millions of Americans. In the coming weeks, we will announce a jobs and economic recovery plan. This is to rebuild our economy. This will put us on a path to build back better from the crisis, compete in the 21st century. It will strengthen small businesses and will create millions of jobs with your help. Now, President-elect Biden knows that we can't address the economic crisis we're facing without confronting this virus. So we call on all of you to join us in leaning forward and acting. We're going to start with this national vaccination campaign, and with the goal of dramatically speeding up the pace of inoculations. And as you've heard, we'd like to do 100 million of these in the first 100 days. But this is just the first step. In the coming weeks, the president-elect will lay out this jobs and recovery plan, and we hope to work with you as this plan is announced and as it's considered by Congress. Well, now, since starting the transition a few weeks ago myself, we've hit the ground running. I'll be working with no longer Congressman Cedric Richmond, but Senior Advisor Cedric Richmond will be in the Office of Public Engagement, and our role will be introducing the country to our nominees in the short term, and then meeting with various stakeholders throughout the business community for myself. So as you gather today to discuss the business role in democracy going forward, this couldn't be a more key time for business and government to partner to help our country build our economy back better. Supporting small businesses teetering on the edge, rewarding hard work, addressing the structural inequalities in our economy that the COVID-19 pandemic has not only laid bare, but worsened. Now, our team will work with you to invest in American workers and pull all the levers of government to create millions of good paying jobs, raise incomes, and advance racial equity across the economy. Thank you for letting me be here today to kick off this event, and I look forward to working with you all and celebrating with you all tomorrow virtually. Now I'll hand this off to Daniela.
Great. Thank you so much, Zach, and for reminding us of the importance of being here to celebrate the time-honored tradition of the peaceful transfer of power. I'm Daniela Ballou-Ayres, CEO and co-founder of the Leadership Now Project, a membership organization of business and thought leaders committed to renewing American democracy. I'd like to thank our co-hosts at Public-Private Strategies, our extraordinary lineup of speakers, and everyone who has zoomed in to join this discussion today. Like so many Americans, business people are asking themselves, how did we get here and how do we fix it? How can we build trust in our democracy so it provides the foundation for a thriving economy and society? And how can we tackle the challenges ahead that Zach just spoke to? COVID, a highly unequal recession, crumbling infrastructure, and climate change. We started the Leadership Now Project in 2017 when a group of Harvard Business School alumni found ourselves unable to stay on the sidelines while American democracy was at risk. Over the last 4 years, we've built a national membership organization that is conscious of historical precedent. Democracies can successfully navigate crises when business leaders step up to be part of the solution. As political scientist Daniel Ziblatt describes, business and other civil society actors can provide the essential soft guardrails to uphold the norms of democracy when parties themselves get too polarized. And when business leaders don't step up, well, that's when democracies falter. In the last few months, our members across the country have proudly led the call for election integrity and joined with partners in other across companies and industry associations to ask lawmakers to respect our constitutional processes and acknowledge the Electoral College outcome. 2 days after the insurrection, we launched a 5-point action plan for companies to respond, including by withdrawing funding from lawmakers who refuse to acknowledge the results. But sustainable solutions won't come from business pulling back at a time of crisis. The Edelman Trust Barometer reported last week that business is now the most trusted institution in society. Some are calling CEOs the fourth branch of government. With so much at stake, the question is, will we be part of the solution, not just by reacting to crises like the January 6th attacks, but by being partners in building innovative and effective institutions to get our country on track. I'm thrilled that Leadership Now members, academic advisors, and one of our new leaders to watch in Congress are among the panelists today. They are at the forefront of efforts to fortify our democracy and represent a new brand of business leadership that our nation now needs. It is now my pleasure to introduce chef, humanitarian, and entrepreneur Jose Andres and Minnesota Congressman Dean Phillips for a virtual fireside chat. Jose Andres is a culinary innovator, author, educator, humanitarian, and owner of Think Food Group. A pioneer of Spanish tapas in the US, he is known for his award-winning group of more than 30 restaurants. In 2010, Andres formed World Central Kitchen, a nonprofit that uses the power of food to empower communities and strengthen economies. His team served over 3.6 million meals to the people of Puerto Rico following Hurricane Maria. His group also fed poll workers and voters when they braved the COVID epidemic to go out to vote in 2020. And right now, he is making sure that our National Guard is well fed as they protect our nation's capital. The Honorable Dean Phillips, Congressman from the 3rd District of Minnesota, was elected to office in 2018 on a platform of campaign finance reform and healthcare reform. Prior to taking office, he led several businesses in Minnesota, including as CEO of the global brand Talenti Gelato. Congressman Phillips sits on the Ethics Committee, Financial Services Committee, and Foreign Affairs Committee. He is Vice Chair of the Bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus and was one of the lead authors on the PPP Flexibility Act, which helped save countless small businesses and jobs. He's a graduate of Brown University and the University of Minnesota's Carlson School of Management. Dean was selected as a Leadership Now New Leader to Watch in Congress in 2018. We're thrilled to have both you, Dean, and Jose with us here today, and I know you're both also here in Washington, D.C., and very close to understanding what the sentiment is in our nation's capital. So thanks for all of your leadership and look forward to the discussion.
Hello. Oh, I can hear me, but I can't see me.
I can hear you, Congressman.
There we go.
And I can see myself.
Oh, I take such pride, Jose, on being like savvy enough to get this stuff done. But hey, and most importantly, hello, everybody. I want to start by letting everybody know that what we witnessed on January 6th, what I personally endured in the House chamber, was not in any way the birth of a new American movement. I want to assure you of that. What it was the beginning of a funeral for a movement that in my estimation has endured for far too long. So in the spirit of hopefulness and optimism, I just want you to all please be participants and keep the faith. And my grandmother, who spent a lot of time in the kitchen with me, used to tell me that the fastest path to someone's heart is always through their stomach. And nobody embodies that spirit more than Jose Andres, a man whose wife actually allows him to have relationships with carrots and potatoes outside of their marriage, and my second favorite chef in the entire world. If I didn't put Andrew Zimmern at the top, Jose, I would never eat in Minneapolis ever again, as you surely know. And I also
Congressman, I second. He's my favorite chef and my favorite person too in the whole world.
Yeah, so in that case, you're number 2, but try harder. And I also, just before we begin, I want to thank you because in no small way, Jose, you inspired my wife, Annalise, and me to host a bipartisan dinner series at our house, bringing people to the table, breaking bread, and probably most importantly, breaking some of the horrible political rules that still are in effect here in Washington. So I want to thank you for that. But as a little warm up, Jose, how about you start by telling all of us about your first sailing trip to America?
I began cooking, let's say professionally, going to school fairly young, 14, 15 years old. By the time I was around 18th, every single man in Spain in the old days will have to join the military for 1 year, year and a half. I did my military service in the Navy, and they put me to cook for the Admiral of Spain, because by the time I already was a young, talented cook. I won a few awards. I was working in some of the best restaurants. I went to the Admiral and I told him that I was very honored, but I wanted really to be on a ship. And I told him that no, any ship, in one ship that served as the training ship for the midshipmen of the Spanish Navy, the Juan Sebastián Elcano, in honor of the person that ended the circumnavigation, the first circumnavigation around planet Earth. On that boat, we'll sail around the world. And it was first time that I left Europe and I visit different countries, Africa, Latin America, the Caribbean. First time I came to America, Pensacola in beautiful Florida, a town I remember with love, and I've been back a few times, and that celebrates the 5 flag celebration. One of them, the Spanish Castilian flag. That day I said, I belong to America. But the most important moment was arriving to New York under Verrazano Bridge, New York Harbor, Ellis Island, Lady Liberty. That night before we dock, I remember I was laying down on the deck of the ship, and I was looking at the American flag not too far away at the Lady Liberty Island. And I thought that the stars in the American flag symbolize the same stars I was looking up on the beautiful dark blue American sky, where everything was possible, where you were part of We the People, that if you were hard, the American dream was possible. And to that day when I promised myself that if one day I finish the military service, as the first chance I will have, I will try to come back to America. The American dream, 30 years later, on the day I docked on the west side in Manhattan, around 30th Street, 30 years later, on that same street, 100 meters away from first I set foot in Manhattan, this young immigrant opened his biggest restaurant last year, Mercado Libre Spain in Hudson Yards. So for the ones that doubt that the American dream, it doesn't exist no more, I want to tell them it does exist, but we cannot take it for granted. It's not something given, it's something earned. We need to make sure that we give the possibility to everybody, Americans of many generations or new immigrants like me, to have every single opportunity to work hard and to make it, to provide for our families, to provide for our communities, and together keep moving America forward.
I love that story. And in that spirit, Jose, of the American dream and American business, I think it's fair to say that traditionally, businesses have kept their politics and their policy relatively quiet, mostly covert. But something seems to be changing. I'd love to hear from you. All of us would love to hear from you. What do you think is the reason that suddenly business leaders are activated, more vocal, public about their policy and politics? And what role can businesses play, as you have with World Central Kitchen, to deploy their logistical talents, their strategic talents, to actually address real world problems?
Congressman, on top of a great politician, you've been an amazing business person and CEO. And you know that it's every business desire used to be, to a degree, out of politics. That's what I want. I want to be out of politics. I'm here to serve the people and to be part of my community. But I do believe that in moments of need, the business community, small or big, we cannot be just sitting idle and watching our success without being part of contributing to the success of others. As an immigrant, I believe in the new American dream. What must be good for me and my family and the people around me must be good for others. Cannot be success on the shoulders of others' failures. And I do believe in capitalism every day more and more. I want to be the biggest restaurant company maybe one day, but I want to do it logically, in a pragmatic way, in making sure that everybody keeps moving forward. And I do believe it's possible. So obviously on the business side, just we want to be successful. We want to make sure our government provides the right climate for businesses to thrive, from the right amount of visas to keep bringing immigrants that keep opening businesses and moving America forward, to any policy that just allows small businesses to thrive and succeed. That's what we all want. But also we see that more and more business CEOs, business owners, everyday Americans believe that we must also have public service to the betterment of the lives of others in our communities. So in my case, I've been trying to bring my learning on the business side to try to solve some of the problems that we face today. What did I do? Obviously, I saw the need in emergencies to come with a bigger food response. I am a chef, and like me, is many more that we always try to be there for our communities. What happens if we bring all the restaurant food community in America, even bigger, around the world together in moments of need? What will happen is that we will put our know-how to feed the few, to also feed the many. And that's what World Central Kitchen came to be. In this pandemic, we've done almost 40 million meals. We've answered to every fire, to every hurricane. We've done hundreds of thousands in those emergencies. On top of that, helping countries like Colombia, Honduras, after the hurricanes that destroy big parts of their countries. We've been in the explosions in Beirut, in Lebanon, always bringing the food restaurant community forward. You see, we feed the few, but also we feed the many. I do believe that the new NGOs of the future, they're gonna be very much like a startup in the business for profit side, where we come with expertise of the private sector to bring those ideas to the nonprofit sector. So together we can keep resolving many of the problems next to the government, next to the people. And this way we can be solving one problem at a time. I think that was Martin Luther King that said, if you cannot do great things, do small things great. That's what we all should be doing. Fixing one problem at a time and transforming that problem into an opportunity. I do believe it's possible. That's what we're trying to do through World Central Kitchen.
I love it. And on the subject of policy and prospective work with the Biden administration, where do you see some ways to cooperate over the next 4 years, both with Congress and the administration on some of the issues that you've identified important to you personally and to the whole globe?
When I became American, I feel I was American before I got my passport. But when I became American, I was told that to be an American is not only contributing to our democracy the day you vote, but is to make sure that every day we are part of the conversation to improve our communities. Obviously, I've been trying to do this since I arrived in Washington back in 1993, and doing my little part, like all of us in this call and beyond, all across America. But especially, obviously, with the Trump administration, I've been trying to work to try to make sure that we bring relief to people. Not very successfully, I will say, but I've been trying, because the people is more important than politics. It's country above party. I think this is very clear, President Biden and Vice President Harris elect, and they've mentioned that. But on my case, if something I know is that what I know is by having boots on the ground, by being in the communities, in rural America. I've been in this pandemic in more than 20 states, Congressman. I've been in many hospitals, in many rural communities, in many poor communities. And what people want is not our pity. What people want is our respect. People want dignity given, not given, but earned. They want to be part of the solution. So the Biden-Harris administration are in an amazing moment, but we need to be bold, because hunger, the urgency of now is yesterday. We must provide a way for Americans to do better, and the federal government has the tools to do it. But we need to be pragmatic, as I said before. How many ways, like the FIT Act, President-elect Biden already showed support. We got the FIT Act with bipartisan support already on the Hill. Simple. NGOs like ours, partnering with mayors and governors in partnership with FEMA, the federal government, to make sure that in emergencies, we put the restaurant community up at work, paying them to cover the necessities of families in situations like this. We need to make sure that we bring 360 degrees on food. I love the election of Secretary Vilsack to serve 4 or 8 more years. The experience he's bringing is going to be very important, but we need to be bolder. Food is more than the Department of Agriculture. Food is housing, which we should be working together with USDA to end food deserts across America. Food is homeland security and immigration reform. In this pandemic, we had hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of undocumented working on the farms of America, creating wealth for rural America, and in the process, feeding American families. We must do better for those men and women that they've been there next to us in our darkest, most difficult hour. I do believe that we need to do a food summit at the White House, 2022. The last one that happened, Congressman, 1969 on the President Nixon times. Many good ideas that were executed came from that conference. I do believe it's the time to do this conference again. And more important, it's about time that we understand that food is a national security issue. we take food for granted. We should stop seeing food as the problem, but as the solution. I do believe that we need, as after September 11, we created the National Director of Intelligence, is the time to bring the National Director of Food and Nutrition at the White House, a person that can bring the power of the federal government so FEMA can take care of Americans in difficult times after hurricanes and fires, to make sure that Homeland Security passes comprehensive immigration reform. All the ideas have been bringing forward. So I have high hopes for the administration. In life, I learned that you should be aiming high, and then let's see where you end. But President-elect Biden hosted with me a 1-hour talk about food issues. I think it's the first time that the president candidate dedicates 1 hour during the election weeks to talk about food and food issues. And I see every indication that this administration is coming to give food the importance it deserves on behalf of all the American people.
As the old football coach Vince Lombardi said, you got to aim for perfection and settle for excellence, and that'll be our mantra. And I love the idea of a food summit. In fact, if you do the cooking, I promise I'll do the cleaning. Deal?
I'll do the cooking for sure, but the cooking I want to really do is the cooking of ideas that then are implemented in real time to make sure that never again Americans will go hungry, or we will have Americans waiting in line 3 and 4 hours to get a box of vegetables. I know we can do better. I know we must do better. And I know the Biden-Harris administration and all of you in Congress on the Republican side too want to do better on behalf of the American people. As you said, let's make sure we start thinking about lower walls and longer tables. Breaking bread is what can be bringing America together in very powerful ways.
True that. On the subject of cooking, Jose, tell me your thoughts on the future of independent restaurants in our country. I've tried my best to get the Restaurants Act passed, working with the Independent Restaurant Coalition, as I know you've been so helpful too. And so many have closed, so many are on the precipice. How do you see the future shaping up for restaurants, especially independents?
I do believe the Restaurant Act is something very necessary. We cannot forget that the restaurant industry is one of the biggest industries in America by far. The number of people that employ directly, the number of people that employs indirectly, how use restaurants in the big cities help rural America to thrive and do better. Everything is highly interconnected. So I am a recipient of PP loan like many others, but the truth is that there's been many small business independent restaurants, small owners that they've been having a very hard time navigating what could be at times the complications of the PP loan, having even to fight with many other different business. I do believe that the Restaurant Act itself, it's something very dedicated to an industry that is been suffering dramatically. We had to close, not because it was the right thing to do. I remember I closed my restaurant on my own will when I saw this pandemic hitting hard in the early days of March. But I believe we must be next to the small businesses of America. It's necessary that once we beat this virus, that once and for all, we put all these small businesses across America, where hundreds of thousands, if not millions, lost their jobs, to make sure that we are next to them. So when this virus is beaten and the economy, I hope in the next few weeks, few months, it starts again ramping up, that they will be in the starting line in good conditions to help America to start growing the economy again, to start creating jobs again, and together moving forward. So I hope that the Restaurant Act is something like will be passed. Thank you for your support. I know many in Congress has supported. I know some Republicans, they've been showing a lot of support for it. Let's hope that we bring everybody together. And again, we do support what I believe is one of the essence of America life, which is the celebration of who we are, our DNA, through eating out, through being out in our cities, in our rural areas, just enjoying a plate of food with friends and family. I hope the Restaurant Act will become a reality in 2021.
Hear, hear. We've just got a few minutes left, but I wanted to just reflect on, like you, serving thousands of meals to the troops protecting us here in Washington, for which we're so grateful, Jose. I've been walking through the Capitol just about every day since January 6th, in the spirit of Mr. Rogers, who said, during scary times, you find the helpers. And I found them, walking through the Capitol, or mornings, evenings, thanking our Capitol Police staff, journalists that have been covering these tragedies, and finding the beauty in those who are trying to help. It's fair to say, I think, that the images that we're all seeing on our TV screens and in person, especially here in Washington, are a juxtaposition really of the very best of America and some of the very worst. And maybe in closing, Jose, you can share just some of your reflections, what you've seen, but most importantly, how you're feeling as you look to the future for us here in America and for the entire world that you're so dedicated to.
What I've seen is that in every hurricane and every fire, we've only responded alone this year. When we go to those communities, can be in Louisiana, can be in Florida, can be in California or in Colorado, that at the end, Americans come out to help Americans. That the spirit of we, the people, is more alive than ever. Than the few voices that try to break us apart cannot ever again overpower the voices that want to work together. And this is what I sense every community I've been visiting in this dark hour of ours. So there is a lot of hope. Obviously, I've been since this January the 6th, which I'm a Catholic boy myself. I celebrate Epiphany Day, the day that the three kings came to Bethlehem to bring gifts and to baby Jesus. Obviously, that day is a day that we will remember, not in a good way, in a way, but I think should be a moment just to realize how important that we all respect each other, that we all keep telling the truth, that we all understand the value of we the people and democracy. And I saw that in the eyes of men and women. I was yesterday night until 11:30, 12, 1 a.m. feeding our troops and talking to many of them all around the mall and all around the Capitol. And there we had Americans that they've been many generations from different states, people from Kentucky, but then people from Maryland, National Guard from Virginia. But then within those ranks were men and women that they are first round of Americans, immigrants from Nigeria, immigrants from Jamaica, who they were so proud to be serving their country. Obviously, what we were doing was just providing them some relief. Even they are fed and they are very well fed. Even some people think that they're not. They're very well fed by the National Guard and Congress itself. But the businesses and then NGOs like ours, we've been there making sure that at night they will have a hot soup. In their eyes. Even in their eyes, I only see that they're proud to be there. Even probably they'd rather prefer be with their families, that they feel they are serving the nation, all of us, not taking sides, just preserving the fundamentals of we the people of our democracy. So I know that by tomorrow, we're gonna have leadership in the White House that is not gonna be there just to be fighting for the people that voted for him. I know he's not gonna be there, a woman as a vice president that is gonna be there fighting for the people that voted for her. We know we're gonna have a president and a vice president that they're gonna be there on behalf of all the American people, and understanding too that what must be good for America must also be good to other countries around the world. So let's hope that they will have, I know they have, but the good luck to start from day one. They're ready. And I'm gonna be next to President Biden and next to Harris, like all of us in America, we should, supporting them in the hard times that still we have ahead, but hopefully dreaming of a better tomorrow, and that together with the dream, we the people, we can move America forward.
Well, and we love you. Jose, thank you so much for joining us today. And just to sign off, I want to thank all of you, to Leadership Now, Daniela, just like Jose has committed himself to serving food to people in the most difficult of times for them. The morning after the 2016 election, I promised my daughters at a breakfast table that I would do something. I raised them to be participants and protectors, not observers. And all of you on this call in some way, shape, or form have committed to the same thing. And I just want to say thank you. I wish you Godspeed. And most importantly, keep the faith, because optimism is a whole lot more powerful than fear. So love you all. Godspeed, and let's get to work. Bye-bye. And I'll turn it over to Rhett now.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Congressman Phillips, for your leadership and for being with us today. And thank you, Chef, and your whole team for that amazing conversation. We are obviously thrilled to have had you both for this conversation around inauguration. And today, I think what we wanted to do was dive into an important panel conversation. We're actually going to be having 2 panel conversations today. We're also going to hear a little bit from the Just Capital team on some recent polling that they've done. And of course, most importantly, we want to be able to get your questions. And so before I introduce the panel and we hop into conversation, I want to let folks know that you can use the question and answer function. It's going to feed, the team's going to feed some questions to me when we get to Q&A, but would encourage you all to join. So with no further ado, I want to invite into the conversation Ms. Karen Kerrigan, who is the president and CEO of the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council and a force for small business on the Hill. I also want to invite into the conversation Mia Menz, who's the Chief Administrative Officer of Sodexo. And then of course, Jeffrey Sonnenfeld, who if you haven't read about Professor Sonnenfeld's amazing work, who serves as a Senior Associate Dean for Leadership Studies at Yale, doing amazing work organizing CEOs in this critical moment. And so thank you so much to all 3 of you for being with us today. And if you haven't done so already, please feel free to go ahead and hop on and turn on your cameras and join the conversation. So with that, let's go ahead and dig in. I think what we really wanted to talk about a little bit in this first panel is where we've been. I mean, we've been in this rather perilous moment. We've seen business playing an outside role over the last few months in raising their voices and through their actions. And so really wanted to learn from the 3 of you what you're seeing, what you're hearing. And for those of you who've been a part of this conversation, what has been driving you to do so? So Karen, I wanted to start with you. One of the amazing things I heard from the chef was he didn't just talk about the power of corporations. We're going to talk a lot about the corporate role today, but he also mentioned the importance of small business. And you have been a small business leader and influencer for over a decade. And as we've been having this conversation about the role of business in society and democracy, what do you see as the role for small business? And in particular, in the context of today, how have small business and advocates been responding in the current environment?
Well, thank you, Rhett. It's an honor to be here. It's been like several decades, actually, and a lot has happened over that time, for sure. You're right. It was great to hear Chef Andres talk about not only the role of, larger company CEOs, but also of small businesses. And as you know, Rhett, being in this space for a very long period of time, I mean, small businesses, business owners, entrepreneurs have been natural leaders, in their communities in terms of always stepping up, being very involved, with associations, doing fly-ins to Washington, doing meet and greets back home. Fortunately, and as noted, we by some of those earlier survey results that were discussed a little bit at the beginning or at the beginning of this whole session, small business owners over the course of that Gallup survey that actually surveys the American public about institutions they trust the most, it's small business owners as an institution, as sort of a group that always comes in either first or second, to the military. They've been sort of duking it out over the years. So, it's been really interesting, Rhett, and as I noted, small business owners have been always very engaged, in their local communities, always stepping up to solve problems. But really over the past year and a half to 2 years, it's been a little different. You've seen small business owners really saying, I have a bigger responsibility, not only in terms of sort of traditional Democrat activities like doing a fly-in or doing a meet and greet or contributing to a candidate or perhaps even running for office themselves. But some of the, for example, the racial inequality and strife, how those issues, bubbled up over the past year and a half. You've seen business owners really stepping up and, building consensus and being healing forces in their community and wanting to do more on that front. I mean, certainly during COVID-19, just this disaster, that hit us, last March, even despite the fact that they were under siege themselves, given sort of the huge drop off, in revenues and some of the many problems that they faced. I mean, they really, again, stepped up as individuals and really directly collaborated, worked with local officials, county officials, et cetera, to do what they can to sort of rebuild their economies and to find solutions very quickly, sort of to keep commerce going. And of course, leading up to the elections, as I think most small business owners have done, have always been a force in terms of, encouraging, their employees to vote, to encourage that type of civic engagement. That said, Rhett, I still believe there is a huge role for entrepreneurs and small business owners to play moving forward. And many of them are still thinking about that, saying, we want to step up more. We actually want to be more involved in selecting leaders of this country who are going to be consensus builders, who are going to address problems in this country. So I think the events of the Capitol, what happened, the insurrection and, seeing democracy under attack has woken entrepreneurs and small business owners in another way. And I'm hearing from a lot of them about wanting to be part of what they can do to secure democracy and to strengthen it, for years to come.
Helpful. Professor, I wanted to bring you into the conversation. I first want to thank you. You've been doing amazing work bringing corporate leaders together over the past few months to really get an understanding of where they are. And so I wanted to just ask you to share with folks a little bit about the work that you've been doing with CEOs and what have you seen sort of, since you began this work to the moment that we're at with corporate attitudes and behaviors and the way CEOs are responding in this moment.
Well, thanks, Rhett. And I would want to reciprocate with compliments towards you and what you've done through the campaign, what you're doing now across sectors and bringing these partnerships together. I also should join Karen in complimenting the prior discussion, if you call them a panel, but the fireside chat between Congressman Phillips and Chef Andres. Not only did they time out perfectly, which is a little daunting for the rest of us to follow them, but for those great foodies to talk about food right at the lunch hour, it was painful. But hopefully everybody's all snacking on something. I love the topic. I'm glad we get into this and wrestle about the challenges of leadership. There have been a lot of cliches about the business community and where we are on this front. I actually wrote a book on this, my very first book back in 1980 called Corporate Views of the Public Interest. Only Professor Porter, Michael Porter, would remember that I once looked like that. I actually think I still do. But it was taking a look at business government relations in 19.
You're gonna have to pay me to use my photo. I'm gonna right now.
There's a belief that this is all provoked by the violence last week that brought out the conscience of corporations. In fact, what I found in this book, I was taking a look at the forest products industry in particular. There were good guy companies back then, like Weyerhaeuser, that are environmentalists called the tree growing people. And George Weyerhaeuser had told me back then, and counter to the Milton Friedman mantra of the era, is that we operate with a license from society. And if we violate the terms of that license, it can be revoked. And there were so many business people that shared that perspective, as opposed to, say, one of their rival companies, different ownership, different leadership. At Georgia Pacific was called the rapists of the land. They had very different approach as dominant employers in small mill towns, as major uses of the nation's resources. Everything was different about those companies. There's been a whole spectrum of corporate attitudes towards public interest for a long time. The conscience is not new. In fact, the Business Roundtable originally was founded by what we would call progressive-minded business leaders today as a reaction against where the former National Association of Manufacturers and U.S. Chamber of Commerce were. But people like Irving Shapiro of DuPont and Reginald Jones of GE and Tom Watson of IBM. I'm old enough that, as is Michael Porter, that I knew all those people, as did Michael. And they broke away to try to find a sense of alignment between business and society, that doing good was not antithetical to doing well. And they're brethren today, they're successors, if you will. If we're looking at Ginny Rometty at IBM, or Indra Nooyi through her reign at PepsiCo, Performance with Purpose, or Ken Frazier at Merck, Mary Barra at General Motors, there's not a single person in any line of work, whether or not they're in the clergy or public service, that is more noble than what they do. In fact, at one of our summits last year, we gave Andrew Young an award, Reverend Andrew Young, great, of course, you know, civil rights and UN ambassador and congressman, and of course, a leader on so many fronts, mayor of Atlanta. He just said it's gotten to this point in his life where he has more confidence in what enlightened business leaders can do than public officials and even the clergy, which was stunning. And you take a look at what's been done before we take a look at the sense of punishing the treasonous, or at least seditious, supporting congressman of last week, is that we have seen in the old religious freedom laws, the bathroom bills. Who was it? Was it public officials? Was it the clergy? Was it even, forgive me, Patagonia, Starbucks, Nike, or Apple that led it? No, it was old traditional mainline employers like AT&T, UPS, and Walmart that took on these laws in Arkansas and North Carolina and Indiana, said, we don't want divided communities. We don't want angry workforces. And we want a harmonious nation. And they repealed those laws. We took a look at post-Parkland. Who was it that led the change? 400 major companies without regulations, because it's still there. I think there are 10 states in the country where you can't walk in with a stick of chewing gum in your mouth, but you can bring a firearm. It's unbelievable. It's very hard to make legislative change happen. Well, these companies did. I mean, it was obviously Walmart and Dick's Sporting Goods and others took their semi-automatics off the shelves and ammunition, and others broke ties with the NRA after post.
I'm completely convinced that gay marriage was brought to us by corporate America. I mean, there's more to the story, but they were such a leading force for LGBT equality and gay marriage at the time.
No, exactly. So you get it. And the elections that we had this fall and leadership now, and you guys have a lot to be proud of on this too, because the support for the portals that you guys helped develop, that the business community celebrated, to get for the first time in American history, to have millions of workers with paid time off to vote, and well over 1 million workers called into service by their employers and paid for it to reinforce octogenarian and septuagenarian volunteers at the polls that could have been overwhelmed by either angry MAGA people, or the volume of ballots, or they're at risk for COVID, is that these were really important things. When Ken Frazier pulled off the business advisory councils of post-Charlottesville, and with a slight delay, then ultimately there was a cascade of business leaders. They all left, and most of them never went back. It's the first time in American history that the business community said no to the commander-in-chief for a call to national service. So I think we've seen that business leaders, they're not all noble, and there's plenty of misconduct. Even in the clergy and academia, there's misconduct. But I'm glad that you guys opened up with, Zach's reference to the Edelman research, that there is no more pillar in society right now more celebrated than business leaders. We wound up having a series of crisis calls post-election, right after President Trump went on the air. You remember the election was, of course, November 3rd. On November 5th, he preempted the news hour by making claims that were presumptuous at a minimum, in which political scientists called a coup d'etat attempt. Some thought that was overblown language at the time, not now. But we asked Tim Snyder, a great political historian, to join us, as so many CEOs were calling me saying, we need to pull together quickly over 12 hours overnight. They called me at 7 p.m. at dinner, and by 7 a.m., we had 45 fantastic titans of industry across sectors together and wrestled with it. And Snyder said, we need a statement immediately from the business, Professor Snyder. This is how tyranny erodes democracy, is if people sit back and wait to see how others respond. Even if you think it's pretentious and it's not going to work, don't think that way. So what happened is they hammered out a statement, and then the Business Roundtable, the National Association of Manufacturers, and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce were ready the very next day when the Pennsylvania results were tabulated. And then even before Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer could properly congratulate the president-elect and vice president-elect. The Business Roundtable was the first to legitimately say this was a free and fair election. And here's if anybody has any grievances like President Trump, let him take it through the appropriate judicial channels. But if he does so, then third, that he has to demonstrate that there was systematic fraud and evidence, and we see none. The Business Roundtable said that. And then finally, that we expect a peaceful transfer of power. And that was President Bush followed that same storyboard, as the other trade associations did. The Saudis, the Israelis, every major head of state wound up using that as their storyboard. So, I think there's a lot to be proud of in a long history of doing it. But
I think it's it's really extraordinary. I actually want to come back to that, but before we do, Mia, I wanted to come to you because you're inside a large institution, a large corporation. You're experiencing these things at Sodexo, and I mean, you're uniquely positioned because not only of your role, but just you guys are present in community. You have a healthy line of frontline workers, and so how are you guys as an institution, and how are you as a leader within that institution responding to this moment that society is, asking of corporate leaders? Would love to hear a little bit from you.
That's such a loaded question, and I have so much to say. So thank you for asking, Rhett. Thank you for leading this conversation. Karen and Jeffrey, it's great to be on the virtual stage with you, as I think our perspectives are actually quite complementary. I also want to just acknowledge Leadership Now and Daniela, who invited me to participate in what I think is a really important conversation. I am proudly a Leadership Now member and felt compelled to join Leadership Now after the murder of George Floyd. I've always been moved to use my voice and my platform to advance causes that are important to me. And I think organizations like Leadership Now are really giving us a solid framework to consider our roles and impact even more profoundly. And so I'm grateful for that association, for that trusted partnership, because for lack of a better word, it's been a yucky year. And I thought so much, Red, about the fundamental question you've posed around business meeting this moment. And I think unequivocally we have, we will continue to do so. And I think this desire to act in this moment stems from the recognition that we have an awesome responsibility to help shape society for the better as business leaders. And the lack of trust and faith in government and institutions, which is so frightening as somebody who comes from an immigrant who comes from a developing country and really understands what that means. It makes me proud to be part of a business community taking a stand, and specifically a purpose-inspired brand like Sodexo. So for context, I think you set it up well, but for context, Sodexo is a food and facilities management provider, employs almost 150,000 people in the US. Pre-pandemic, we were serving almost 100 million people a day globally. And I think most interestingly, we operate in over 13,000 sites across the US. And so more than being a provider with employees on the front line, we really are part of communities, from LinkedIn in Silicon Valley to Liberty University in Texas. Our employees really sit at the intersection of all the activities and events that happen in society. This year, the pandemic, racial strife, that culminated, in my opinion, into the election crisis that we all saw. And so what's happening in politics and society is not abstract for us at Sodexo. During COVID, we were feeding students at schools, at hospitals, serving doctors and nurses. And so we've lost people. And so more relevant to this conversation, we are responsible for food services at the nation's capital. And so we had over 30 employees in the Capitol fulfilling their everyday responsibilities when the attack occurred on January 6th. So I wanted to provide that background, but to your specific question, thinking about how we show up in our priorities, let me say that, like for most businesses, when we think about risk, it's a simple equation. We do the math and we ask ourselves if the decisions we're making are good for business, or do they present financial or reputational risk. Last year, that equation changed because it's now about life and death. It's ensuring, and it feels so heavy to say, but it's ensuring our people get home safely at night. Because on January 6th, we could not account for our people for several hours. And so care and concern is at the heart of our business. It has to transcend our company into the communities that we serve. And we're also empowering our employees to take a stand. In the last election, we made voting accessible, because this is a partnership that has to reflect individual activism and also corporate leadership. And I'm saying a lot, but I want to end by saying that January 6th made the contrast between right and wrong so very clear. Sometimes we're blessed, Rhett, with black and white decisions, because we also live a lot in the gray. And so it wasn't a political question. It wasn't even a business question. It was about our teams in the Capitol, our teams who service DC public schools and Howard University. It was about our people and our communities. And so it was so very easy to say with conviction that Sodexo will not support people, brands, or organizations that are not pro-democracy, full stop. And we are taking it seriously and looking at every aspect of our business, our giving, our contracts, to ensure we operationalize this with consistency. That is a stand I'm so proud of, because we're not in business just to optimize P&Ls. We are there to make communities stronger and safer. And so I think we have to be intentional in this moment about using business as a platform, as a force for good.
Super helpful. And we're really close to Q&A. Karen, I wanted to come back to you. We've talked a little bit about your work doing entrepreneurship work abroad and how that's been an important part of democracy building. And I know that you're fairly involved with CIPE. And so I'm just wondering what lessons you've learned from that work that you think might be applicable to this moment as we go about our good work of continuing to make our democracy stronger here at home.
I think the big lesson is we can never be complacent. I think that is a huge lesson. And sort of building on what Jeffrey said in terms of business being a force for good. I mean, that certainly they have been for quite a while. CIPE, the Center for International Private Enterprise, one of the core institutes for the National Endowment for Democracy, strengthens democracy around the world through private enterprise and market-oriented reforms. We have hundreds of projects throughout the world, and we work with business leaders, business owners, women entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs, individuals in business to really foment change and to make change happen. So there is entrepreneurship, economic growth, opportunity for all. And and I've been not only with CIPE, but with the State Department over the Obama years, the Bush years. I mean, really been doing this type of work and training business leaders, but also working with associations in terms of how they can be this force for democracy, inclusive, economic growth and opportunity. So I think the big lesson learned here is that, this is, we have an opportunity to sort of really go back to basics here in terms of our associations, groups like even SBE Council, the work that we can do at home here to train associations and business leaders. And, I know there's been, can America lead in this regard anymore? Absolutely, Red. I think we absolutely can. And, to go to Tocqueville's statement, the greatness of America lies not in being more enlightened than other nations or democracies, but rather in her ability to repair her faults. And I think we've done that rather quickly. We've got some work to do. But again, the lesson is we cannot be complacent, and business leaders, business owners, entrepreneurs, the business community does have to stay directly involved, as we are advocating that they do in other countries to strengthen democracy.
That's right. So we're approaching Q&A, so I want to ask folks to put in. We already have some coming in. Some of the questions are actually where I wanted to head. So Professor and me, I kind of wanted to wrap up a question for you both. I mean, did business meet this moment, right? So we're seeing, we saw, at least from someone who's done this work, for me, I saw unprecedented statements. Statements are one thing. Now we're starting to see actions, right? So we're literally seeing corporate PACs remaneuver the way that they're pulling funding, and we're seeing book companies cancel publications. So the first question is business meeting the moment? And I think the follow-on question is there other things they should be doing? Is there more? So Professor, can I start with you? And then Mia, I'd love to hear from you on that, because we have a lot of questions about this in the box. So Professor. I think you're on mute.
and I muted myself on purpose because I'm reluctant to say anything because Mia and Karen have such great insight. I've been feverishly taking notes on them. Let me just speak quickly. I think business is meeting the moment magnificently. We talked about a number of fronts, whether or not it was we talk about racial justice and where they are and aren't, and a lot on that front post George Floyd, and some of the pivots that we're seeing before our eyes. And the elections bring a lot to the surface. But whether or not it was gun control or gender rights and all kinds of issues before, I think the business community has been there. And sustainability, we've made great progress. The presumed Faustian deal that you see repeated so often by cynics these days, most business community, show me some business leader, show me a quote anywhere where they were fighting for their supposed regulatory rollbacks. Yes, they looked for tax reform that did not lead to the capital expenditures that were promised for the recaptured funds trapped abroad. However, when you look at even the energy industry or the auto industry, they've been fighting the EPA side by side in this administration. Same, wherever you look, you find that they have been taking, I think, some pretty courageous stands. And there's Karen referred to Tocqueville, as Tocqueville had made the comment that another greatness of American society is not just the volunteer spirit and the rest that you have also represented also so well through leadership now, but the idea of social capital, that everything that made this democracy great is not all written hard into the laws, but into some degree of collective trust. And even Milton Friedman, by the way, spoke to that in that 1970 article that gets so misquoted in the New York Times Magazine. He called it social amenities. That never gets quoted, but the impact, the ripple effect of business on communities is recognized, and we sort of create cartoon caricatures out there. I should just let you take this back to the rest of the panel, but it was said long ago that leadership basically, when it comes to looking at citizenship, that Baruch Spinoza, the philosopher, said that it is earned and not born. And I think we're seeing a lot of business leaders that are earning their citizenship. They aren't just assuming it away.
Helpful. Mia, there's a question coming through. If you could touch on that, but I think we also, at least what I'm coming from the question box, and I'm curious, can you individualize the experience of getting one of these decisions made inside one of these large institutions? And I know that you're one person who's, but as you are sort of sitting in the decision-making process and the role you play, how are corporations sort of making these decisions? And do you think you all are meeting the moment?
Yeah, so let me take the meeting the moment question first, because I certainly think there's evidence that over the last few months, certainly the last few weeks, we've taken positions that we may not have even a year ago, because we would have said it wasn't worth the risk. So certainly there's been progress, but I think the real question is, can we sustain this moment and make it a movement? And the truth is, I see this moment as an inflection point with momentum on our side, but I'm not sure it's a tipping point. And I think there's a distinction. I think the tipping point is further away because we can't ignore that we have tens and millions of Americans who still think the election was stolen. And so it feels like we still have so much to overcome. And these people are sitting in our own organizations. And it feels overwhelming, but it also energizes me because I think we have the tools and the collaboration and the conviction that we never had before. But we need to remember that this movement requires stamina and tenacity and an eye towards a North Star, if we proclaim to have a North Star. And the hard part for me is doing worthwhile work while we are seeking to understand divergent voices, respecting people's right to grievances, to their own freedom and thought. So it's finding the right balance between being unequivocal without disposing of people. And I think that feels impossibly difficult, but very, very necessary. And then I would say the climate has made it easy to be a compassionate leader in organizations. Because I can remember when I was starting out, I actually thought the fact that I was high touch and deeply compassionate was something I had to downplay, 10, 12 years ago. But I believe, as I look at our leadership team, that we are living more kindly as leaders. And that drives organic, sort of authentic decision making. So we assemble quickly when we're dealing with difficult topics, but we we almost always, through consensus, get to the right decision, which is that we need to act and take a stand, and that's what we've done.
Super helpful. I think we have time for one more last question. I'm going to give each of you a chance to respond. I want to celebrate the moment. We're heading into an inauguration and a transfer of power. And I do think it's impressive what the business community has done. But I do want to press you all a little bit. We're living in a moment of historic inequality. Low wage workers in this country, many of them are working 2, maybe 3 jobs to survive. When we talk about race in this country, we've seen a lot of response from corporations, but I think there's more work to do. Those are just 2 issues that I know I grapple with every day as I'm talking to business leaders. And so I do think that I would implore that there's more to do and that we need to push business leaders harder. And while the response to this recent round, I think, has been amazing and encouraging, and I'm hoping opens up a new conversation, I'm really curious about where do we go from here, because in unequal America where people have to work 3 jobs to get by is not going to allow us to continue to be the best country in the world. And so I really think we have to, really push our counterparts in the business community to really think about this, and that sort of inequality feeds through all of these things, and I think feeds through the narratives and may have been, I know is part of the factor that led to some of the challenges that we faced around the election. So I wanted to just sort of tackle that, like, we're in this moment, we should celebrate, but that there's more work to do, and just hear about what you thought, like, where do we go from here, and where do you think, sort of business role? So I know that's very, very loaded, but Mia, let me start with you. We'll go to Karen, and then the professor, I'll ask you to close us out. So Mia.
I'm so happy you asked this question because it gives me the opportunity to talk about essential workers and this idea of economic mobility, which I think has to be front and center as we think about reform, business culture. As we talk about respect, because we talk about respect for communities, that has to flow to people on the front line who a year ago were considered non-essential. And I don't like that term at all. But really, service industry employees, ask Chef Andres, were treated as second-class citizens, but now we are calling them heroes. They're out of the shadows, they're into the limelight, and it becomes the opportunity, I think, for all of us to move together from what has been a low-cost economy, because I'm in a business that's just, it's a commodity business, but moving that into an economy that values and puts a premium on human worth in our people. And I think that as an extension of all the topics we've been talking about, inequity, race, democracy, that business really can play a role in shaping that kind of pivot in key industries. And so that is work that we are doing in collaboration with other organizations, but we have got to close the gap. We've got to close the gap.
Karen, I know this issue hits at home because a lot of low-wage workers in America work for small businesses. And so I'm just wondering how you're thinking about this in particular, given your small business. And I'm a big believer that entrepreneurship is a huge path to wealth building in our country. I know you are too, but just thoughts from you.
Yeah, and right where we are right now with our economy and what's happened, in the big hole that we're in terms of businesses and in terms of jobs, and particularly some of the areas in our country and industries that have been hit the hardest. This is a massive opportunity for entrepreneurship. And it's an opportunity for our institutions and agencies that support entrepreneurship, whether and other educational institutions, of how do we provide individuals with the tool, the capital, right? We're big on that, Rhett, in terms of access to capital, democratizing access to capital. We have a lot of ideas for that. But we have a big opportunity because there's a big need in our economy right now for more businesses, for successful businesses, to transform industries, but also to really, and particularly in those parts of the country that have been, a lot of those urban areas that have really been hit hard, right? Because of the stay-at-home orders and because people aren't commuting back, commuting into those urban centers. So I see an opportunity, and gosh, I'm really looking forward to working with the Biden administration, the commerce people at the White House, the SBA, because there is an opportunity, I think, to really remake the way that we deliver tools and capital and all those other things that are going to help entrepreneurs create businesses, but also create great businesses that pay their employees really well.
We're just 1 minute over time, but Professor, I want to give you the last word here, and then we'll transition over.
Well, thanks. I really think that that as we talked about the role of an entrepreneur, and then also just the role of personal modeling that the two prior speakers just addressed, I think says it so well. In terms of some of the statistics, however, it's important to keep in mind that Black median income household income is, which was 66% of those of white households in 2016, dropped to like 61% now, and that we have seen that the tax cuts that were supposedly going to be generating more jobs, or at one point fewer million jobs created under Trump before the pandemic than the last 3 years of the Obama administration. We can see that this has not been the roaring economy people thought. And it's kind of interesting just to take a look. Of course, we won't have time to get into the concentration, of course, on even when you consider institutional holdings with pensions, that still the wealth in the stock market has really gone to less than 10% of the nation. What's happened, and to see that right now the economic plan that's been revealed in the last 10 days and last 2 days in particular, that we don't see a reaction against it from the business community. Even the $15 an hour wage, people are biting their lips a little bit. I think there are 10 states that already have it anyway. So there's a lot of focus in this Biden administration, the Biden-Harris administration, taking a look at the underserved populations, which is great, and hopefully the business community will be supportive of that. As you know, I brought President-elect Biden, now before he was President-elect Biden, to our last two CEO forums in September and in June. In June, we were supposed to take a look at pandemic pivots. It was the theme of it. And with 200 CEOs there ready to talk about their coming out of their COVID caves, I called on Ken Frazier, of course, the CEO of Merck, who was, one at that time of only 4 Black CEOs of a Fortune 500 firm. And he started talking about how he could have been George Floyd. That wasn't the lesson plan for the day. So we threw the whole thing out and talked about racial justice. And he talked about what was done systematically to give him opportunities in a gang-fueled part of town, and the difficulties that he had and how he triumphed them. And his frenemy, the CEO of Johnson & Johnson, Alex Gorski, talked about things on an institutional level that they're doing. But then the CEOs of Goldman Sachs and IBM started talking about how they realized it was coming across patronizing in town hall meetings on racial justice, that they kind of did what sometimes Michael Porter and I have felt we need to do, is to flip the chalk to the people that are sitting out there and let them talk, and not let us talk at them from the blackboards or from the whiteboards or whatever it is up there from the front of the room. But then we thirdly had the CEO of American Airlines give a very moving, spontaneous talk about how he got bounced off of a American Airlines flight, and like me, is a big moose of a guy, and got a middle seat coach on a Southwest Airlines flight. But as he got on board, the flight attendant, who happened to be a Black flight attendant, saw that he was carrying a book called White Fragility, and you know the book. And she said, I got to meet this guy. I didn't know who he was. She sat down next to him, and they had a great conversation. Despite social distancing and all the rest, they embraced. It was very emotional. She's a very spiritual woman. And as she asked for his card, and he pulled it out. She couldn't believe it was the CEO of American Airlines on a Southwest Airlines flight. Her mom works there. It was a very emotional experience. They talked about that instead of at the institutional level, externally in the context, or your role as the CEO, but your role as a person, as a personal modeling and what it means. And not a single CEO complained of a bait and switch, that people are ready and eager to talk about it and get past the cliches. And Rhett, I'm so happy you brought that up. And again, I should stop here now, but I think it's really been a wonderful discussion. I'm so honored to be a part of this.
Well, thank you. Thank you for Professor and Mia and Karen for your leadership during this time and this moment. And hope we can all celebrate tomorrow as we sort of look towards better days, and appreciate you spending time with us. And with that, it's my pleasure to turn the conversation over to a good friend, Allison Omens, who is the Chief Strategy Officer. I've had the pleasure of knowing Allison for years. We've been business organizers and wranglers together for now what seems like over a decade. She's doing amazing work at Just, better understanding how the American public feels about these issues. And so with that, we'll kick it over to you, Allison.
Thank you, Rhett. It's such a delight to be here. And thank you to Danielle and the team at Leadership Now, as well as all the other participants. I was listening to the panel, sort of eager to jump in because so many of the findings and work that Just Capital is doing is so connected to the conversation that we just heard, as well as I'm sure the one that's to come. Just Capital is a nonprofit, and one of our core objectives and really our mission is to connect the values of the American public with the actions and performance of corporate America. And so we do extensive polling of Americans and how they see business role in addressing stakeholder capitalism, inequality, democracy, all of the conversations that we've been having today, racial equity, climate change issues. And we have a series of polls that we've done over the last couple of weeks and months that felt particularly relevant for this conversation that we wanted to share. So if we can advance to the next slide. Thank you, Chris. One big takeaway that we really just heard throughout the last panel, and that we know from Edelman and other work that's been done, is that people really believe increasingly that CEOs have a role to play, have a responsibility to take a stand on what I call the big issues, on issues like inequality, and I'll get into this a little bit more in a second, but including protecting democracy. And this is really a trend, as you can see, that is emerging. And if we go even further back in terms of when we're measuring things, there's increasingly interest from Americans, both trust as well as expectation that business leaders should be part of the dialogue and the sort of solution finding on everything that we're experiencing right now, whether it's the pandemic, racial uprisings, or protecting democracy. And that's a really important point, I think, as we think about what happens next. And if, Rhett, you sort of asked, did business lead the moment? I think it's a really interesting question in terms of both, did business lead the moment, and will business meet this next period of time that we know doesn't end tomorrow, but is in fact really addressing sort of the multiple crises that we are all experiencing on the economy and on health and other issues. So moving on to the next slide, I just want to share a couple of recent polls. You're welcome to go to our website, justcapital.com, that has sort of more details. But we did do a poll last week asking how people felt about companies from January 6th, sort of through this period of time. And regardless of partisanship, there not on every issue, but there was a real appetite for people to see corporates take a leadership role, and recognizing that there was a role for companies to be playing. This last slice, the I trust CEOs more than politicians, is very interesting. Sort of majority across the board are saying that CEOs are sort of a better messenger and better protector of democracy than politicians, which I imagine we'll sort of talk more. And I know, Danielle, you and others are doing a lot of work on that throughout. Moving on to the next slide, we specifically wanted to dig a little bit into political donations, sort of expectations around where we've seen real movement in the last couple of days even. The number one issue that people are looking for is transparency, which we also have seen post George Floyd's murder, around the pandemic, that people are really looking for transparency and expecting companies, and particularly CEOs, to be honest and straightforward about what actions they are actually taking. That statements are a good first step, but understanding actually what choices are being made is something that, as workers, consumers, sort of just citizens, people are looking for. You can sort of read throughout pausing political contributions, sort of all down the list. But I think that transparency and accountability is the most important for me to call out for you. And then finally, the last thing that I wanted to share is we've also done polling in November and December, just asking about more broadly, as we move into this next panel on where we're going from here, the question about what role the private sector has to play. That Rhett sort of started by introducing me, that we've sort of both been business wranglers in conversations. And I think that for a number number of people on the line, both as a business leader, a civil society leader, that what we're asking for is whose responsibility is it to be thinking about solving the jobs recovery, racial inequity, the public health crisis, as well as sort of the other things that we know we and others are concerned about. And across the board, again, sort of the majority of people are saying that both institutions should work together. And I think that really signals what at least I and others I know are thinking about is, what is this changing relationship with government and business, and what may that look like as we're looking at transfer of power and a new president in Biden and Harris. What is that actually going to mean? And we've talked about the Business Roundtable signaling their commitment to stakeholder capitalism. That's something that we had just spent a lot of time on. But the signals that we are seeing, I think, from Americans, from business leaders, from academics like the people on this call and others who are really trying to understand the evolving expectations of business leaders themselves as a community of peers. That's really something that we're going to be watching towards and measuring against as we move forward as well. So, thank you, Rhett and Danielle and Katie for inviting me to share these findings. I believe I'll be joining the Q&A in the next section after the panel, but thank you again.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Allison. We really appreciate it. And I think it's been very timely to see what Just Capital has done. As many of you know, Mr. Sonnenfeld had some data that was released last Friday. So I think it really tied into the timeliness of our conversation. And because we are running just a few minutes behind, but not so bad, I just want to turn over the second panel conversation to Lisa Blue. She is a partner at Able Partners and an early stage consumer venture capital firm focused on the positive living sector. Lisa herself is an investor in such businesses as Goop, Daily Harvest, Spring Health, and Chief. She is a board member of the New York Public Library, KIPP New York, and the Mount Sinai Parenting Center. Lisa also chairs the investor group of the Leadership Now project, and as we've all talked about, a great organization of business professionals committed to renewing democracy. She's a graduate of Duke University and has her MBA from Harvard Business School. So Lisa, without further ado, I will turn it over to you to introduce our second panel. Thank you.
Sorry, Lisa, you're on mute.
Such a classic Zoom move. Anyway, thanks everybody for staying with us and for being here for our last panel of what's been a really important, interesting, vital conversation, super timely. I'll quickly introduce our guests and jump into the conversation. We have Morgan McKinney, who's the Chief Operating Officer of Global Consumer Banking at Citi. Morgan attended Amherst College, has an MBA from Harvard, is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and the Leadership Now project as well. Michael Porter, a strategist and professor at Harvard Business School, who's really spent his lifetime career at HBS and has brought economic theory and strategy concepts to bear on some of the most challenging problems facing corporations, economies, and societies today. And we also have Anup Prakash, who is president of REV Ambulance Group. Prior to that, he was at Harley Davidson, and he served in the Bush administration at both the U.S. Small Business Administration as well as the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. He's also a former U.S. Marine Corps officer, and he currently sits on the board of the Hunger Task Force in Wisconsin and is an active member of the Leadership Now project. So thank you all for being with us today. Anup, I'm going to begin with you. As has been touched on just by Allison and in the earlier conversation, people have started to refer to CEOs as the fourth branch of government based on, some classic things like predictability, rule of law, and sort of a veer toward more centrist approach. So we talked a little bit before about the role businesses played leading up to this current crisis, but let's focus on the future. How, given that context of the support and trust in business leaders today, how can business contribute constructively to the health of our democracy and work in partnership with the Biden administration?
Well, thank you, Lisa. It's great to be here with everyone. I want to thank Leadership Now and Public-Private Strategies for having me. It's been a phenomenal panel so far. I think this year has forced us all to think very differently. As has been spoken about in the previous panel, it has really nudged us as business leaders off the fence. And I think what is really, clear is that now that we're off the fence, we cannot get back on. If anything, the dialogue between business and civic leaders needs to increase almost exponentially in this coming administration to foster ideas, stability, and understanding. And I also want to say it's important that we shift our language, not to put the pressure on companies. I think we talk about companies, we talk about institutions, but at the end of the day, we know that companies are really made up of leaders. And leaders like Chef Andres, leaders like Mia Menz, who you heard from earlier, who have made the decision to act and speak. And I think that is a critical thing that, businesses and the business world is not monolithic. And it's really going to come down to leaders who are going to speak. And I think we have to applaud all of the early voices who've come out, because I know for most business leaders, engaging loudly in civic matters is an unnatural act. I've worked for CEOs who dreaded going to Washington. They didn't want to meet with any local officials. They wanted to pass that dirty work on to the government affairs shop and never be bothered by it. And they wanted to focus on the things that they thought were behavior that would be rewarded by the public markets. And that was focusing on profits and focusing on shareholder value. And I think we are challenging, really in this moment, decades of management education. I have my bookshelf of books. I got Professor Porter's Gnomes there from my time at HBS. And I also have, Winning by Jack Welch, where I actually went through it yesterday, and I went through to find a moment in that book where he actually talks about public engagement, and he doesn't. It's just not there in the generations of management thinking. And I think all of that is on the table today for us to reshape and reframe the problems, that the archetype for the ideal CEO and the ideal business leader is someone who goes beyond just volunteering on nonprofit boards, but actually getting their hands dirty with government and not kicking over to the government affairs shop. So, to your question about action, like what can we do going forward? I think there are two really important concrete things that we have to look at. And one is we have a real opportunity to educate and activate local business leaders, because, to the point I made earlier, this idea of government is actually quite a foreign concept to most business people. And I think we see a lot of leadership at a national level with the Business Roundtable, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, other speakers who are very eloquent at a national or very large, Fortune 25 level. But what we don't hear from necessarily is active business leaders at the local level. And, we have to trust that the trust that comes through that Edelman study and the barometer and the data we just saw from Just Capital is largely trust in local employers and local business community that people can touch and they can feel. So while we have to be really proud of the voice that, national business leaders have had in Washington with the Chamber and the Roundtable, we have to start working at a local level. So here I can give you an example. Here in Wisconsin, Rev Group is based here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We've become more famous for our divisiveness than our cheese and our beer. And I think we might have a moment of unity with the Packers winning the Super Bowl. But beyond that, we're going to have to do a lot of work here at the local level with local business leaders to get them on board with civic engagement and to move beyond this divisiveness and not be an enabler, but actually be someone who's really out there positively shaping the agenda of state legislatures and the state government. So that is a really, really key thing, is operating at the local level. And the second action I'd like to throw out there, and I think it's consistent with what we heard from Professor Sonnenfeld, as well as some of the actions Mia is taking at Sodexo, is that every business needs to adopt a democracy first agenda. And I think this idea of democracy first as a filter for all government engagement is really important. And I think what we have been as business people, as I said before, we've been lazy about civic engagement in government affairs. Whenever there's been a pressing government related issue, usually we're happy to kick it over to our government affairs shop or our lobbyist, someone who can go take care of that business. And then we don't really look at it anymore. We look the other way. And there's been a lot of effort from a lot of nonprofits to try to shine a light on business activity, whether it's business contributions, what those things have been over time. But you really have to dig. You really have to dig into those accountability reports, and you have to dig into, open secrets to see who's given money to who. And I think all of that is going to serve, business badly if we do not step forward and adopt a democracy first agenda voluntarily and self-regulate. We have a parallel for this. Businesses have long, at least over the last couple of decades, really forced ourselves to look at our supply chains and pull the onion back and the layers back to see, are our suppliers acting ethically? Are we sourcing goods from places that are operating ethically? And we have the same opportunity to do this with our government engagement, to be much more transparent and make it a norm that we're not advancing company interests at the expense of the public interest, but actually looking at them together. And I think both of these actions, acting locally and having a democracy first agenda that we can enforce, are really things that we need to press on. And I think the administration can lean into those.
Great, thank you, Anoop. All really valuable insights. Sort of building on one of your comments around, the desire for a lot of folks to kick things to the government affairs department. Morgan, I want to switch to you. I know you've been able to do the opposite of that and develop a lot of success internally at a large organization like Citi to advocate for democracy, and would love for you to share with the audience today what you've learned from your own experiences as a change agent that will help you going forward, and any advice you have for others that are within large organizations that might want to take on some of this pro-democracy work.
Thanks, Lisa. And like Anoop, absolutely delighted to be with this esteemed group. And I've learned a lot through the session already. I guess what I would say is, from my point of view, I think there really is this cumulative crescendo for business leaders to take a greater action to help address some of these most intractable challenges that we have in our society, whether it's climate change or racial inequity or income inequality. There's a host of obviously big challenges. And we say, why is that and why now? And I like, to me, is we might be at the inflection point, not the tipping point yet. But if we just step back, I think COVID has laid bare many of the longstanding failings of leadership, both in the public and the private sector. It's as if the tide has drawn out of the world and exposed the actual size of these challenges that have been unaddressed for a while, how big they actually are. And obviously, COVID has actually worsened a lot of these systemic challenges that we have globally. And these challenges in society have been building even before COVID struck, and whether that's income inequality building, I agreed with Rhett's comment earlier, this fraying of the social fabric, a political system that isn't working well for its people it's intending to represent, and even the impact of digital disruption, right? We've seen a lot of the positives of digital, but we also see many of the negatives with, everybody has a digital microphone. You see platforms not serving sort of their broader stakeholder community. The robots really are coming and eliminating jobs, and, our adversaries have better cyber tools, if you will. And the last point is, why now, is engaging to address these challenges will be good for business. And some of the other comments have supported that. COVID illustrates the interconnection between economic and physical health and resilience, our environment, obviously our social stability. They're all inextricably linked. And a well-functioning society is good for our business. It means we can invest for the long term. It means there's equal opportunity. It means there's economic prosperity. And we know diversity is good for business, and you can't have innovation without diversity, and it leads to better decision-making and problem solving. So I think, my experience at a large bank, no one can go it alone to solve these complex problems. So I kind of step back on the challenges facing societies today, both in the US and abroad. Citi actively partners with FinTech to bring these solutions to life. And you have to partner with entities that have complementary strengths, and business brings a lot of strengths. We talked about the supply chain management, obviously distribution of goods, digital solutions. We can really bring many of businesses' capabilities to light to some of these society challenges. And that's one of the key reasons, like Mia, I joined Leadership Now Project to really make a difference in my business lens. And like Anoop, I'll highlight maybe 3 areas where I think business can help to support societal goals and democracy. The first is, I agree, personal leadership. It's not, Citi has 200,000 people around the world. And so it has to be led on a personal basis, and innovation takes a village, and change does more broadly. So that means wherever you sit in a company, you can, make procurement decisions, you can develop value-driven products, you can demonstrate a passion for diversity in your hiring practices. So everyone can take a personal leadership. And then if you step up at the business and corporate level in terms of how the company is led and managed, I agree that sort of this compassionate leadership, this move to more sustainable leadership, to responsible leadership, thinking well beyond the quarterly returns of, that you're giving to a shareholder, right? Which really has been the dominant, that Jack Welch book, it really has been the dominant focus, and that's insufficient. I think, Professor Sonnenfeld said that, there's great examples of business conscious over the last several decades. I think it's been insufficient, right? The bar is higher now, the problems are greater, and the tools business have are important. And so I think we need to think more broadly about our stakeholders. That's sort of the economic impact of decisions well beyond the company interests per se, or the society impact on a longer term view. I was CFO of a 10 billion business at Citi, and I quarterly earnings recycle, right? That's sort of how you live your life, and how do you take more decisions on longer term basis. And then I think the third pillar, if you will, is really the ecosystem of these companies, right? So, Citi operates in 100 markets, and we impact those communities and by the products we have and the capabilities we provide. And so I think, to maybe just close out comments, I thought I would highlight a few examples of how Citi has tried as an entity and institution to try and improve society. The first is Action for Racial Equity. We committed $1 billion at the end of September to address racial inequality in the US. And, some of the stats earlier, an average Black family in the US has 1/10 the wealth of an average white family, right? And if we can improve racial equity, we can add something like $5 trillion to US GDP. So Citi is providing greater access to banking and credit in communities of color. We're increasing investment in Black-owned businesses. We're expanding home ownership among Black Americans, and we're advancing anti-racist practices in the financial services industry. So that's one example. Sustainability is another, and I think ESG in corporate land has well past the tipping point. But we're funding $250 billion in low carbon solutions, whether that's clean energy, renewable energy, clean water, et cetera. Championing equality through our transparency on pay equity. Citi published its pay gap, and it's pretty disappointing. It's appalling, ugly, as Corbat called it. And women on average are paid something like 70% as men, right? And that's a reflection of we don't have enough women in senior positions. And then even in our product suite, so championing equality through chosen name. You can choose your name, whatever your from a transgender point of view, you can choose a name on your credit card, and that's a product. So these are types of examples on a range of types of issues that one company alone can make. And our impact is in financial services, who we fund and how we do it. But obviously all multinational companies and smaller businesses have many other different levers that they can bring to bear to help address some of these society challenges. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Lisa.
Thank you, Morgan. Really helpful insights to hear what Citi's been up to. Michael, I want to turn to you now. You have documented that executives are increasingly concerned about the role that business plays in democracy. In your conversations with CEOs, what, if any, hesitation or concern do they voice to you in what comes next? And what is your advice or guidance or playbook, if you will, that you offer them in this new phase of government?
Well, thank you. This is a fascinating and very important discussion, and it's right on the top of CEOs' minds these days about how to think about all of this, how to think about these issues. And I think I would tell you from all of my work, I think we're in a historic transformation right now of how business is thinking about society and its role in society and its role in government. And there's lots of reasons for that. But the number one reason is that our political system, the way government has been working, is failing, miserably failing. We're not moving any of our most important problems forward. Healthcare, infrastructure, racial justice, public education, environmental quality. None of those things are moving in the right direction. We've been failing, and our government is not doing its job. That's because the government has not been designed historically to deal with advancing the problems facing the society. It's been designed to reward and perpetuate the actors in our political system, who are the two dominant parties, the duopoly, as I call it, who are really passing legislation that advances their own partisan interest. and wins the support and resources coming from all of their partisans in the society. So another thing that's happening is not just the failure of government. The failure of government has caused a lot of businesses to say, this politics government thing isn't working for us. Why are we doing what we're doing? Why have we been giving all this money? Why have we been playing with a playbook that's been constant for decades and decades? And they're starting to question whether the role they've been playing in government is even working at all. And it's taking a lot of time and energy and effort. The second thing that's happening is that there's, as most all of you in this group know, there's been a real shift in business thinking around what is business's role in social factors. And that has been triggered by the this concept of shared value, the idea of business can contribute in a very important way to many social issues. And that's good for business. We have more and more companies that are starting to play this role and are trying to get involved in all kinds of ways in improving education, in improving many aspects of the environment. Companies are playing much more of a role in their community. They're playing a role in trying to make their employees have a better career, a better life, more diversity, more retention. They're playing a bigger and bigger role in many of these so-called stakeholder concerns. And so when we put the failure of government the way it's been working to really benefit business and provide the environment business needs, and the recognition in business that we can play and should play and must play a role in actually engaging societal issues and really taking leadership in those issues, we have something that is truly remarkable. I mean, this is unprecedented in probably hundreds of years. This is a huge change in business thinking. And I think the CEOs that we train at HBS and the ones that we interact with are very rapidly transforming themselves in how they're thinking. And they're willing to be more involved. They're willing to speak out more. And they're starting to see that this is part of running a great company. It's no longer something on the side. You know, Milton Friedman, the social responsibility of a business is to maximize profits. That was the mindset, that was the driving force behind how business thought about society and dealing with government. It was this idea, no, that's not our job. We don't do that. We let governments do that. We let social institutions do that. We just focus on profit. Well, that's changing very, very rapidly. And thank goodness. That's given us a moment here, which frankly, I'm very, very optimistic about. I also think the new administration is going to have an entirely new opportunity to engage with business. And I hope they understand that. And I hope they're not thinking about business the way it has been. And I hope they no longer have any views that business is inevitably going to be the enemy here or going to be a problem, is not going to be a real ally to the administration. I think this will be the administration in which business is the greatest ally to a government in America that we'll have ever recognized in our lifetime. So I think that I just want to say the big theme here is we're in a major shift. Now, what's going on here? I think that we're going to see business increasingly questioning how they're engaging in the political system and in government. And they're very increasingly concerned about how they're participating in democracy, because now they're starting to realize that whatever they've been doing, it isn't working. Our country isn't doing well. Our democracy isn't doing well. And people are starting to open their minds to, okay, let's think about this differently. And the old government affairs department, the way it operates, that was fine 100 years ago. That was fine 50 years ago, but it's changing. Now it's destructive. The traditional government affairs model is not working. It's creating, frankly, embarrassment and lack of public support for business. So business leaders don't want that. They want to become part of the solution in America, not part of the problem. So what are some of the things that business is now starting to do? And there's an HBR article, Harvard Business Review article from July 2020. And this was a major body of research to kind of look at this question. How is business engaging in society? How is it engaging in government? How is it engaging in politics? And I encourage anybody that's interested in this topic, you can dig in there as deeply as you want. And I encourage everybody to look at that, and we'll make that available. We'll post it so anybody can get it. So what we're seeing now is a number of changes that are going on. The first thing is, I think businesses had a playbook for dealing with government and dealing with politics. And that playbook, I think, is something that we have been looking at now for some time. And here's what the playbook has been. And this has been going on for a long time, and it's just been accepted. This is the way we do it. The playbook, number one, was lobbying, heavy lobbying, a lot of spending on lobbying to try to influence policy in the special interest of business, and also giving money to elections. It turns out that the business community in America is by far the largest funder of our political system. It's by far the largest funder of our elections. And that money has been used to really push for business interest. And instead of looking at the overall public interest, the overall interest of our environment or our economy, and I think that is starting to crumble. We're starting to understand that business realizes that's not a good idea. Our traditional lobbying and our traditional approach to dealing with elections is not working. We're electing people who are blocking progress. We're giving money to legislators that don't want to pass the legislation we need. We're lobbying people to distort regulations that make the regulations worse and make us increasingly out of sync with what we need in the society. So one thing is this whole lobbying spending game is starting to shift dramatically. It already has, and it will more. Traditionally, companies' playbook has been to talk to their employees and try to persuade them where they should vote and where they should give their money. So companies have been trying to push their employees to do the business favorite thing. And I think increasingly we all realize that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Our employees, they're citizens. They get to decide where to vote, where to put their money, and business has no role whatsoever in trying to influence that. That's only going to undermine support for business. That's only going to turn people off to capitalism even more than we're already seeing in some cases. So another thing that companies are doing is they're spending massive amounts of money on ballot initiatives. You know, now we have a direct democracy, we have referendums and ballot initiatives, and that puts things up to vote, important questions up to vote for the citizens. What's business been doing? It's been outspending the citizens 10-1. So when there's a ballot initiative about reducing drug prices and creating new rules, the businesses involved in that industry spend massively, outspend the citizens who, 10-1, and the business interest wins over and over and over again. That's undermining, again, how people think about business, and it's reinforcing bad public policy. So the other thing a business is doing is what we call the revolving door. We're running out hiring government officials, giving them good incomes, and expecting those government officials that we hire to help us get our policy solutions incorporated into bills and legislation. And, Dodd-Frank was an incredible example. We had Dodd-Frank, and it ended up with dozens and dozens and dozens of amendments, but they were all pro-business amendments. And that was because of all these government officials that were using their relationships to change things in the favor of business. I think business is now understanding we want better policy. We don't want to drive policy in our special interest. We want good policy that benefits the general interest of all citizens. And that is a very rapid trend that's going on right now. And so we're seeing a tremendous rethinking of the playbook. How should we do this? And what are some of the standards we want to meet? And one of them has already come up in this discussion. One of them is transparency. There's a big movement now to make our behavior transparent. Who we're spending on, what we're lobbying on, and all those other practices that we've been following. And that transparency is a big movement. It raised significantly in this recent election, and most alumni feel that companies should be transparent. We have a lot of data on that. The great majority of HBS alumni, 88%, were all for more transparency and all for changing the nature of the game that business was playing. So there's a moment here. It's that finally, after all this angst and history, we've hit the moment. This is where things are actually changing before our very eyes, and we'll hope that that continues. We also have companies now and the Chamber of Commerce saying we're not going to give to candidates for election that are about blocking and creating gridlock. The reason our political system is failing is the parties have kind of created a situation where there's gridlock. They never agree. They don't want to compromise. They want to do the Republican way, the Democratic way. And what's happened is that this gridlock has just blocked the changes that we need to make in our society. And now companies don't want to play that game anymore. We don't want to play the gridlock game. We want to, if we're going to give money to a candidate, we want to find those candidates who want to make change, who want to sound policy, who want to make things better. That's changing very, very rapidly. And then, and this is a very, very high level overarching point. I think more and more businesses want to make our economy better. They want to make the overall business environment better. They're increasingly of the view that trying to make their industry a little bit advantaged by trying to manipulate the rules on various matters, that's a dumb idea. It's not working. It's not working for us. It's not working for citizens. And so we're seeing that happening as well. So I think what I would hope that everybody who's listening to me will be thinking is, my gosh, is this really happening? We've had for 100 years the same old playbook of business trying to change the game, modify the game in its favor. But for a variety of reasons, that playbook is changing. And this election, as well as some of the recent social issues we've had, like racial inequity and so forth, are just amplifying that, pushing behind that. So I think we are, hopefully business is going to be a leader now in moving our country forward, advocating things that our country, our citizens really need, including lower income citizens, including citizens that lack a good education. Business, I think, increasingly is going to be a leader, I think, in trying to drive that in the right direction, rather than just supporting this dysfunctional political competition that we see. As some of you know, I did a whole book with Catherine Gale on the competition in the politics industry. And essentially what politics in America has become is a duopoly, two dominant competitors that are very powerful, and each of them is focused on their own partisan supporters, and they're not focused on the country as a whole. And the reason we have so much gridlock is if there's a Republican-sponsored bill, no Democrats will vote for it. If there's a Democratic-sponsored bill, no Republicans will vote for it. And again, we have to break down that partisanship, and there are ways to do that. We need to start reforming the way we do elections. We need to reform the way we vote. There's a lot of innovation, and we had some good results in the most recent election. A lot of states started changing their voting systems and their democratic systems. So I don't want to make it seem like we don't have to worry about this anymore, but we have come so far, so fast. And I think the sentiment in business and the views among CEOs and the views among up and coming young business leaders are totally changing. And so now what we have to do is build on that, reinforce it. And again, I very much hope that this new administration will not see business as an enemy, but as a great ally, given this new evolution in how business thinking goes. And I think if that happens, we're going to see a perpetuation and a acceleration of this very different and much more constructive role between business and government and society. So that is probably the most optimistic view that one could have. But after many, many years of working on this, I think there's a lot of evidence. And again, I refer everybody to the HB article because I think all of that is covered. So let me stop there. Thank you for your attention. It's so exciting to see this panel. It's so exciting to hear these discussions. I'm not the only one who said something positive about what might happen. And I think it's happening. So hopefully all of us can come together around making this new movement, this new constructivism, this new business playing a positive role in society. Hopefully we can all get behind this, reinforce it, and it will keep happening. So thank you for asking me.
Absolutely. Thank you for those optimistic thoughts. I can definitely attest that those of us at Leadership Now will be doing all we can to ensure that the Biden administration has a positive relationship with the business community.
Mm-hmm.
We have just like a couple of minutes left, to quickly summarize what I heard from you. The old playbook is out. The days of throwing this all to the government affairs office is gone. Business has a democracy first agenda. Morgan touched on sort of specific ways within a company that we can do that. Anoop talked about the importance of really fighting this at the local level. And Michael, you talked about all the ways the playbook is getting rewritten. Quickly, if you each had about 30 seconds or so, if you had any additional comments to share with the audience today before we close out.
Well, let me very quickly say the reason that everybody's focused on democracy is businesses finally understand that the democracy doesn't work and it's not good. The way it's working is bad. It's not just doesn't work, it's working badly. So I think that focus in business on democracy, making sure we have voting, making sure we have good rules, making sure we have better policies, I think that's going to be a lasting thing too. And it's funny, it took us a long time in business to figure out that all this stuff we were doing didn't work. And it was just getting worse. And now I think, thank goodness, there's much more of a social view in business. There's many more companies focused on what I call shared value, benefiting society as part of running the business well. And I think all of that has come together. And the question is, how can we build on this? How can we create more best practices? How can we create more learning, more knowledge about all this? And I think we can hope that we'll have a good phase in American democracy. We've had good phases in American democracy many times in our past, but starting in around the 1960s, as those of you who've looked at the book I published in this area, starting in the 60s, the parties started really undermining the rules of how our politics system worked. And things got worse and worse, more and more partisan, more and more gridlock. And what now is we're coming up after that disastrous 30 or 40 years, and we're now starting to go back and start to change the system in the right direction.
Great. Anoop?
Well, I think it can't be any more encouraging than to have Professor Sonnenfeld and Professor Porter, who have the benefit of a long history with the business community and seeing that continuum and basically declaring that we are at a moment. And I will say, I'll emphasize that I think this is going to take leaders at the local level. We do have to engage. I know, I'm excited to engage with leadership now to establish activities here in Wisconsin to increase the discourse and the get the activation of that local business community who can take on these national trends. But the best evidence of the fact that we're at an inflection point, and a real inflection point, is that we're all sitting in different parts of the country and we're all feeling it at every place we sit. And I think this is really a movement we have to grab onto. And I encourage anyone on the call to get in touch with leadership now and establish chapters in your state and bring your state business communities together so we can make this happen quicker.
I could just put in one short addition to that. Everybody needs to know that all the rules for elections and how the political system works are actually set at the state level. It's not in the Constitution. So states are very important and the way they run their governments has a very big impact on what happens. And so I just want to amplify the point you made. The state level focus is very important, and businesses often have a lot of influence on the state legislature and how the state works. So this is just another way to keep the ball rolling.
Great, thank you. Morgan, I'll let you close and then we'll kick it back to Rhett.
Great. I just would maybe sort of add, if we step back, having tried to drive change at a company like Citi, which is only 200,000 people, and you think about in the US, I'd say this needs the brains of this group on the call and a lot more structure and focus. We're at the very early stages, I would argue, of this transformation, and these problems are fairly intractable. Michael, I heard your lecture when I went back to HBS reunion, and I cried on the duopoly of the political system. It's very, and I'm used to working on complex problems. So I think it needs the brains of business leaders to really think through how they individually, and then how through their companies and how through their ecosystems, they can help contribute to addressing some of these very large challenges that we have ahead of us. So it's exciting, but I'd say early stage.
It is early stage, but there's very clear data in this most recent election that there were major shifts in the patterns. So we're on the way.
Awesome.
We're on the way.
Excellent.
Thank you everybody so much for your thoughts. This was a fabulous conversation, really interesting 2 hours, and are grateful for your time and your contributions. Rhett?
Awesome. Well, it's super interesting when hundreds of people stay on the line for more than 2 hours. So I want to give my thanks to all of you as well for joining us today, for B, the good work you've been doing, and C, the work that we have to do going forward. I think the role that business is playing in strengthening our democracy is going to continue to be critical. Not only over the next 4 years, obviously we have some immediate opportunities during the Biden administration that relate to policy and governing, but even beyond that, as we think about businesses' role in sort of reshaping where we go, really building back after COVID-19. So I just want to offer a huge amount of thanks to Daniela, the whole Leadership Now project team for being for all of your work, but being super responsive over the last few days. This event came together in just a few hours or just a few days. And then I also want to thank my whole team at PPS, particularly my co-conspirator, Katie Vlistra-Wannenberg, who's been the heart and soul of pulling a lot of these things together, Chris, who's been helping to run the tech, and we have a whole design team and many, many other folks. So today is just the start of the conversation. Please go enjoy tomorrow. Really savor the moment that we live in a country where the transfer of power happens. I look forward to reconvening with many of you on the line as we continue to work towards strengthening our great country. Talk soon. Bye-bye.